kids, to another exciting episode of Wait What? Sports. I am never not going to do the arm thing. I'm sorry. It's just...
No, but what I love is that each time we do it, Eli gets less and less enthused. Wait, what? Sport.
That's his Eeyore coming out.
I was going to say, pretty soon he is going to be Eeyoreing it, and it's going to be like, hi, guys.
Wow. I'm just a producer, just...
Even his can we's are going to be like, can we, guys?
Could we? Please?
That's the most enthusiastic he gets the entire time we're recording.
So, I'm Amy. Over there's
Gina.
And
Dr. Robinson.
Okay, now that we've got our introductions out of the way.
The preliminaries are done. Check.
We are moving on this week to a couple of big names in the sport of boxing.
Mm-hmm.
So, boxing is not quite as big as it used to be.
And they're not Mike Tyson or Holyfield.
No. These are old school names.
Right.
We're going way back in the history.
I guess you say groundbreaking names in the world of boxing.
As far as, recorded historical boxing goes.
True story. Because boxing goes back a long way.
Well, and not only that, but there's a lot of unofficial fights.
I.e. Bridgerton. You know what I'm talking about.
So, anyways, thank you. You made Eli do the squishy face thing.
When? We didn't get him last time, did we?
No. He left the room, though, for quite some time.
That's true.
Anyways, so, these are names from boxing's historical past.
Yes.
Like I said, boxing is not quite as big as it used to be. But quite frankly, it's still one of the foundations for the sport that has overtaken it in popularity, which is MMA.
Yep.
Now, everybody, when boxing was losing popularity, everybody was like, oh, it's just because it's too brutal. And then what comes and replaces it?
MMA. Have you ever watched a UFC match? I'm just saying.
So, the main difference is that your goal in boxing, and this is why people thought it was too... brutal is because it mutated into the goal being to knock somebody out rather than points.
Right. Let's just landing as many punches as possible in a fight versus...
Right. So it used to be more point based, and it should still be, but the prize fights on TV, let's face it, more people tune in if you knock somebody out.
Which is crazy to think how much you pay to either go see it in person or pay to see it on pay-per-view, and it lasts, 5 minutes?
If you're lucky.
And you're like, was it really worth it?
There have been fights that have lasted all of 35 seconds.
And you're like, I would have been like, where's my refund? I want to see it duke out.
So, I personally got into boxing as a fitness thing. Mm-hmm. It became a different way for me to train my body.
Right.
But from there, I started learning some of the history. And like I said, I went to the African American History Museum, the Smithsonian, in D.C. a few years back, and found out about some people that I didn't really know about.
Right.
So one of these names is somebody that most kids have heard the name before. Mm-hmm. And one of them is somebody that, unless you watch PBS...
you have no idea who that is.
Probably don't know who it is.
Right.
Okay. So, the first name is Joe Louis. Mm-hmm. And the second name is Jack Johnson. The reason I say unless you watch a lot of PBS, because there was actually a documentary by Ken Burns about Jack Johnson a few years ago.
I don't think I knew about that documentary. But I know didn't they talk about him on Muhammad Ali's multi-part documentary?
Probably, because he is the pivotal figure in history.
Yeah.
The Ken Burns did a documentary series on Jack Johnson. It is on the PBS app if you happen to have the Passport app. There's an entire section of just Ken Burns documentaries.
He has so many.
His daughter is making them now. So
is she?
Yes.
Have you seen any of hers?
Yes.
Are they good?
Yeah. I mean, she has a lot of her father's sensibilities, but she does do some more controversial topics. The ones that go to award ceremonies and stuff are slightly controversial because they're not historical documentaries. They are documentaries about things happening today.
Gotcha. Okay.
So anyways, Jack Johnson was the first official Black World's heavyweight champion.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this because there was a world-colored champion. Okay?
And
that
don't
was
be
actually
all...
a champion belt. That was the title of the belt.
Yeah.
Was the world's colored heavyweight champion.
Did not know that.
And then there was just the world's champion, the world's heavyweight champion. And Jack Johnson was the first African-American or Black champion wearing the world's heavyweight champion
So
belt.
he crossed that dividing line.
Right. And in boxing, they didn't really call it a line because it was a little bit more wavy than that. Okay. So at the lower weight titles, there were many African-American champions before him.
Gotcha.
There were featherweights, there were lightweights. But Jack Johnson was the first officially to hold that belt.
So I'm looking up some history here, and it says that Johnson made his debut in November 1st, 1898.
Yep.
In Galveston, Texas.
Wow. 1898.
So he actually had the championship belt from 1908 to 1915.
Wow. He
Okay.
defended it that long?
So in boxing, they call it the color bar. Because
Okay.
it wasn't really a solid line, like I said. There was some waviness in there.
Yeah, because they're like, depending on where you are within
But they would
weight
put
classes.
a bar up to block the pathways for people.
So, okay.
So
Was the world colored champion, was that just a minority? Like, only minorities boxed in that particular?
only African Americans.
Okay. Okay.
So some basic history about Jack Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Johnson was born in 1878
When you think about...
in Galveston, Texas.
We were born in the 1900s. Like, 19...
He was born 101 years before me.
My God in heaven. Like, that is a long time.
He died in 1946.
Wow. How old was he?
You're making me do math. 70-something?
I was going to have you get the calculator out,
Did
but okay.
you know how he died?
Can I follow the rest of the history?
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
You can't jump to the end. I appreciate your enthusiasm, though. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Oh, you face palmed. You turned aside.
Welcome to the dark side.
I didn't squishy face. Though.
You didn't. You didn't.
I just hit my forehead. So, okay. This man is very complex and controversial. That's why it was a 4-part Ken's Burns series.
It was
okay?
4 parts?
4 parts.
Whoa.
Because of how controversial and how complex everything was for him. Okay? So, if you all remember our Larry Doby episode, and how we said, even when Larry Doby was growing up in the 1920s, it was very rare to have mixed communities.
Right.
In Galveston, Texas, Jack Johnson grew up in a mixed community. In the 1870s.
I can't even imagine that being a thing.
Okay? He is quoted as saying that he always had a gang of white friends. And it didn't really matter because poor was poor. And when you're poorer than dirt, it didn't matter what your skin tone was.
Wow.
So, what year he was born?
1878.
1878. So, literally, when Juneteenth, 1865, he was born at...
Within
Just
20 years of that.
20
Just
years,
after
yeah.
that.
Woo!
But to think that those mindsets were that progressive, I mean, they're kids, but for the parents, though, to be like, okay, it's cool, you're hanging out with black kids.
My guess is that, again, when you're poor,
Yeah.
you're poor. And there was probably a section of town that was only for the poorest
folks.
of poor.
Yeah.
Like, the people that can't barely afford 4 walls around them are here regardless of what color they are, because they can't afford anything.
Right. And they're probably looked down on regardless by both sides.
Right.
So,
as he was growing up, he had several different jobs all over the place. He tried lots of different things. And he kept coming back to having to fight for different things, right?
right.
Different reasons. People, hitting on his girl, or his girl taking off with his best friend, or...
He had a rough go. Like, life was not nice to him.
And he moved out of Texas and across the country and did lots of odd jobs and things, trying to find his way and make some money. But it turned out he was a pretty good fighter. And he made his pro debut as a fighter in 1898. Crazy thing is, in Texas at the time, boxing was illegal. Prize fighting was illegal.
In Texas.
In Texas. It was illegal to have a prize fight.
In Texas.
So, his very first pro fight, he's boxing a white man who was a really good boxer.
Right.
They both got thrown into jail. They couldn't afford the bail. White boxer taught him everything that he needed to know how to box. He came out of jail knowing more about boxing than when he went in.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
I'm kind of floored by that whole... Well, let me backtrack. Texas. Like, when I think of Texas, I think of, like, bar fights and just, like...
The difference is
roughing it.
prize fighting.
So you can't make money
You can't make money
to
off of a
fight somebody.
Right.
But if you fight at someone, like, whatever.
Right. If you have a fight on the street with somebody
Yeah.
because you have a legit beef, whatever. But as soon as you put on gloves, now, this era is just after bare knuckle, okay?
True.
As soon as you put on gloves
It changes.
and somebody says you're going to earn this amount of money for this fight, it's now illegal.
I would love to know what the conversation was between Joe and that guy he fought in jail that made him go, you know what? We got nothing but time. Let me show you a couple things.
Honestly, here's the thing about boxing. Even way back when, that's why it was more of a color wavy line.
Yeah.
Because true boxers really wanted the skill.
Yeah.
They wanted people to have the skill of boxing. They wanted to teach the skill of boxing. They were looking at the skill of the boxer. The promoters were the ones that had the bar.
Yeah.
Okay? The people willing to pay money were the ones who put up the blocks.
Okay. Makes sense.
In 1903, Jack Johnson won the World Colored Heavyweight Championship.
And he started at what year?
1898.
And in 1903? That's a fast progression, you know.
In 1908, he won the World's Heavyweight Championship.
So literally just 5 years, somehow he managed to, like, crawl and claw his way up to the very top echelon.
So a gentleman named James Jeffries was the world champion up until, like, 1907. Okay? He refused for years to fight a colored man. He was like, I'm not going to fight a black man.
Yeah.
He finally retired without ever defending his championship.
Against black people or just in general?
In general. Like, he defended it twice and that was it.
That's crazy when people can do that. But anyway.
So, I mean, that's the way boxing goes. And it got to a point where, like, basically he knew that he was either going to have to face Jackson or Johnson or retire. So he retired.
So he quit before he just had to do it.
Yes.
Got it.
So when a boxer retires with the championship, they actually have to set up rounds for people to come up the ranks and win the championship.
Golly.
So a Canadian named Tommy Burns won the championship out of that, round of stuff.
Right.
He fought Johnson in Sydney Australia. It was so bad that in Australia, they had to set up special fight areas. They had to tell people no drinking, no drugs, no weapons were allowed within a certain radius of the vicinity because of how crazy it was.
Was
with
it
a
a
black man fighting a white man?
I was going to say, was it a racist thing?
And that was just something they were kind of worried about.
Yeah.
Now, when we get to later fights, after he had won the championship, it really was, they were worried about him.
His safety.
But Tommy Burns, got this title, and it took actually 2 years for them to actually get to the fight in Sydney. They set it up, but a lot of times, what you don't realize, and even in our world today with boxing and boxing championships, it can take 6 months or more from the time that the fighters and their promoters agree to fight to the time where everything is set up for the fight.
What
and the fight
takes
happens.
so long? Is it finding a place, getting licensed, and all that
Venues,
stuff?
licenses,
Okay.
all of that stuff. And
Especially if it's international.
think about how much harder it was in 1908.
Yeah, with no fax machines.
There was no internet.
Right? No fax machines, no internet.
So they taunted each other for 2 years.
Oh, that's a lot of trash talk and a
Now,
lot of hurt
That
feelings.
is one of the big things that people did not like about Jack Johnson. He was a giant trash talker.
He had a mouth, yeah.
And he would not shut up. He taunted people through the entire fight. You can watch film, black and white, silent films where he's just talking the entire fight.
You're just like, knock his teeth out. Like,
That's where Muhammad Ali got it from.
But the difference is A, the era.
yeah.
B, Muhammad Ali would talk trash about what you're doing in the ring. Jack Johnson would talk trash about your wife.
He went dirty.
He would talk about your girlfriend.
I mean, if nothing
And
else.
if you're fighting white man as a black man and you're talking about stealing his girlfriend in 1908,
Ooh, you talking about getting lynched, son. Harsh reality of the situation.
so I'm going to turn slightly to some of the controversies only because it will make some of the other stuff make sense as well. Okay. Jack Johnson had 3 wives. They were all white women.
Oh, he was like
He
he was an
swore-
NBA player before an NBA player was an NBA player.
He swore off black women after his second girlfriend hooked up with his best friend and robbed him.
What? That's not funny, but that's messed up. I had
Yeah.
to school myself because I was about to say something else.
Ding yourself.
We're not regulated by the FCC, so you can say whatever you want.
I'm not gonna drop an F-bomb because children might be listening.
Yeah, you don't know. We want to stay family friendly.
Get your dirty mouth away from the mic.
Listen, on our show, I will drop the F-bomb because we're not regulated by the FCC.
Mic
That's
off.
your show.
Mic off. Anyway,
Anyway,
so his girl cheated on him, and then they robbed him after?
so
Ain't that about
they
it? You know
paired
what?
Up and he came home from work one night, found her gone, and all of his stuff gone.
They did him like that?
Yeah,
I would rather you beat
When
me
he
up
was
and
in-
steal from me than
when
just
he
like,
was living in like New York.
that's messed
before he became a
up.
boxer.
So, okay, I
So-
can't even be mad at him for feeling jaded and being like, you know what? Forget all of y'all. I can't say I would have done anything different.
So that's the thing about what I was saying, like his trash talk. He was saying things, and because people knew that he didn't date black women,
Right.
that he was married to a white
It's
woman.
a double whammy, yo. Like, how you gonna talk about the kind of woman you're married to?
So, so he went to Sydney. He did this fight. He won the title.
Mm-hmm.
Caused so much tension. Have you heard the term Great White Hope?
Yes.
Do you know the history of it?
I know it had to do with boxing, but I don't know too much more about that.
Jack London.
That's his name. Yes. I've heard that name as well.
Do you know who Jack London is?
No, but I've heard the name.
White Fang. Author. White Fang. The book. Jack
Really?
London.
He's the
That
same
Jack
guy?
London. Yes. He coined the phrase Great White Hope because they thought they could find somebody
To beat him.
to beat him. 1910. Jeffries came out of retirement
Oh.
After 6 years.
Get real.
to challenge Johnson in a fight in Reno.
So the man he said he never would want to fight.
The man who retired rather
So he
than fight
wouldn't
him
have to. Right.
had been lobbied so hard as the Great White Hope
Dang.
that he came out of retirement.
That's crazy.
Okay? Johnson was living a quiet, unassuming farming life with his wife. 6 years out of retirement. He had to lose over 100 pounds to get into fighting shape. Okay?
You know what? I was just about to ask that question because if you haven't done anything like that in that long of a period.
Meanwhile, comparison. Okay? So you've got this quiet, unassuming farming white man
Right.
taking on Jack Johnson, who, for lack of a better term, was a media whore.
He's a whore. He's a whore.
He was a media whore. He loved the spotlight. He wanted the spotlight on him, so he would do things just to have the spotlight.
Right.
Like marry white women. The
Jeez
tensions
Louise, dude.
were so high at the Reno fight. Alcohol and guns were outlawed. Apples and any other items that could be weapons were also outlawed.
Now we weaponizing food? Like
Well, I mean, think about like all the comedian, all the shows that you see, you know.
yeah, but those are tomatoes, you know, like
But like they used in Shakespearean time, they used to throw anything they could get. They eggs, apples, rotten food.
so are they like patting people down for apples? Sorry, sir. I need your Granny Smith.
The odds in Vegas were 10-7 for Jeffries.
So they really believe this guy will be able to like knock Johnson on his butt and shut him up.
The fight film was the most popular in the U.S. and was shown regularly in theaters until Birth of a Nation came out.
Dang. So this was prior to Birth of a Nation?
Oh, yeah, no, this is 1908. Birth of a Nation was like 1920?
You know, I forget
No,
they used to
it's-
show like newsreels and stuff like that during movies and
Well, and this wasn't
current events.
even a newsreel. This was literally film of the fight.
Oh.
And it was shown as a film, all of the rounds.
crazy.
So,
and now we pay how much to see it on pay-per-view?
I mean, the thing is that they, Birth of a Nation came out in 1915.
Wow.
Okay, so 1910 to 1915.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice
This
little stretch.
played regularly in theaters. People were paying money to see it over and over and over again. Okay? So, this is one of his big controversies. The color bar. Johnson used it to his advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And he never gave another black man an opportunity at the title. He would only fight white men.
He wanted to be the one.
Probably because he knew that there were other black
That could knock
young
his
men that
butt
could-
right out.
that could at least go toe to toe with him.
Right. If not
And he
clean
did
his
not
clock
believe
completely.
that there was another white man that could. So he used that bar to his advantage, and people were very sore about it.
So I have to wonder, are you mad at him because he did it or because he was such a strategist? Is that a word? Strategist. Thank you. I don't know why I couldn't get that together. Do you admire him for being such a strategist, or do you look at him as a controversial figure who was infamous? You know what I mean?
Well, like I said, it was
Could
one
go
of
either
those
way.
that people felt some way about.
Yeah,
Okay?
visceral reaction, as they say.
So, I alluded to multiple controversies, and I talked about how he was married to 3 different white women.
Mm-hmm.
So, his personal life was filled with controversies.
It sounds like it would be.
So he loved car racing and fashion. He spent a lot of money.
Here we go.
On car racing and fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He was doing a race in New York. He was pulled over for speeding. Because, it wasn't an official race.
Okay.
It was a race.
Air
He was pulled over for speeding. And the ticket was $50. And he handed the officer $100. And he goes, I can't break $100. And he goes, hold on to it because you're going to ticket me on my way back.
Stop it. No, he didn't.
Yes, he did.
It's almost like challenging an officer. I dare you to catch me a second time.
he's like, I have to come back, so you're going to catch me again.
So there's a whole ticket paid in it. You're paying your own speeding ticket in advance. That's cocky as heck.
Yep. So.
What was that officer's reaction? Like, do you say, oh, okay, and just walk back to your car?
Along with his wives, one of whom had some mental health issues.
Okay.
Which is part of the reason why they all, had controversy with him. There's kind of a back and forth as to whether or not he may have aggravated some of her mental health issues by possibly giving her syphilis or something like that, because he also did sleep around a lot. So even though he was married, he still had his side pieces.
Well, he is a professional athlete. No knock against other professional athletes, but it's not uncommon.
His first wife passed away. Now, the other thing is, almost all of his wives were rich of their own accord. So they were rich white women.
He just keeps burying himself a little deeper with each one.
So he opened a nightclub in New York. He also had one in Chicago at one point. Mm-hmm. Both of them he ran with one of his wives.
The same wife?
It didn't say.
Okay.
The Black and Tan Club was in Harlem. Mm-hmm. And within 3 years, he sold it to the gangster Owen Madden, and it became known as the Cotton Club.
That's the Cotton Club? The
Cotton Club.
Wow. So it used to belong to Joe Louis first, or Jack Johnson first. Interesting.
It was Jack Johnson's.
Interesting.
And it was called the Black and Tan Club.
Okay. Fascinating.
Jack Johnson was also charged with the Mann Act. The Mann Act was a act that we would today call an act against human trafficking, or white slavery, was the term that they would use back then.
Expound.
Do you know what white slavery is?
No.
White slavery is what they would charge people with if you were a man that was not purely Caucasian. Mm-hmm. And you were transporting young women across state lines, possibly without their parents' knowledge.
So, you were mixed?
Anybody who didn't
look white.
Did not appear to be white. Now, I will say it wasn't written specifically that way, but that's how it was enforced.
Yeah.
Okay? Because they would never go up to especially a rich-looking white man and accuse him of
anything.
And usually, they never worried about young African-American ladies being taken by a white man.
Of course not.
So, it was typically if a white woman was seen traveling with somebody of color.
That is interesting.
Today, again, we would see it as a human trafficking law because that's what white slavery is. Mm-hmm. That was the term for it back then.
Okay.
The idea being that these people were not taking these people as wives, and these were not willing young ladies that had been kidnapped and therefore being sold into sex slavery. The actual Mann Act was worded as a transport of white women,
very specific,
across the line. White was in quotes as well, across state lines for immoral acts.
So how do you prove that that's what they're doing?
You can't fully prove it.
But not that they ever needed the burden of proof.
Right. As long as you were of two different ethnic backgrounds.
It was enough.
They would say if the man was not white.
Right.
They would say that this is why they were going. Now, it was proven for him because the young lady who was traveling to be with him and traveling for him eventually became a wife.
Mm-hmm.
And she said,
This is voluntary of my own accord.
He actually had lots of young ladies who would go across the country to where he was or follow him or come in trains with him.
Right.
Because they wanted to be with him even if he didn't want to be with them.
Yeah. They were just looking for a way in.
We would call them groupies nowadays. So those are his biggest controversies. And I point these particular ones out because they do contrast to Joe Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Louis was raised in direct opposition to Jack Johnson. Okay. So he was born in 1914 in Alabama and died in 1981 in Vegas.
Mm.
Joe's trainer and manager had rules about specifically white women and women in general, alcohol, and trash talking.
Geez, I wonder where those rules came from. What brought that about?
Although he specifically had rules about white women, Joe was still actually a bit of a womanizer.
Well, I always say you can't hold the guys so much at fault because if there's women willing to do it,
doesn't make it. You know how I feel about human nature and the fact that, probably nature-wise, it does not make sense for us to be so monogamous, DNA, gene pool-wise, whatever. But cultures are what they are, and
right.
The cultural norms and rules are what they are.
Mm-hmm.
My issue, again, usually stems from whether or not everybody involved knows what's going on.
Yeah.
So Joe had a couple of really famous fights. The most famous is Max Schmeling. And I do believe I'm saying that right.
How do you spell it?
Yes, you are.
SCHMELING.
Yes, you are, and say it 5 times.
How do you say it?
Schmemling.
Schmemling? Okay.
That's 2.
It's German.
Schmemling. Oh, nope. I was overconfident.
Did you notice how I was too smart to try?
And my job is done.
He looked me in the eyes, and I had to take that.
So there's actually a really, really good biography written for 6th through 9th grade.
Hey, don't underestimate those books. They be so good sometimes.
Okay, by the way, one of the highest earning Jeopardy champions talked about, even while he was winning, the fact that he would always go into the library and go to the children's section to ask for nonfiction books because they were written in ways that were easier to digest and understand.
Absolutely.
Okay? And that's how he became the Jeopardy champion.
Now, if Jeopardy champions can do it.
So anyways, the book is called War in the Ring, and it's literally about the lead up to and the fight and the aftermath between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling.
Yeah.
All of this happened during World War II.
Wow.
So you can imagine black American fighter,
German,
white German, and the importance that was put into this fight.
Absolutely.
That's the reason why the title of the book is called The War in the Ring.
Yeah.
Because it was a proxy war between America and Hitler.
Right.
What was the boxer's name again?
Schmemling. That's 5.
No, I'm asking Amy.
Max Schmeling.
That's 3. Okay.
Why don't mine count? Because I failed already?
Yeah.
Jerk. Back on topic.
Anyways, so the whole book is broken up into alternating chapters between Joe Louis and Max, and they talk about how both of them grew up and how they became boxers and their road to getting to this championship.
Yeah.
Okay. They faced each other a grand total of 3 times.
Okay.
Okay. The one known as the War in the Ring was, I believe, the 3rd fight was the last fight.
Okay.
And you can imagine, like I said, the build up, because it was built up as America versus Hitler.
Of course.
And it was watched worldwide. Okay. Even the most staunch racist in America was all about Joe Louis, because we had to beat Hitler.
I've often said the only time that a lot of white people cheer for black people is during sports.
Well, and not only that, but it was a time of war. So if you were...
It's our country versus your country, and that creates a unity.
Right. They weren't paying attention as much to his skin tone as they were to his nationality, because especially back then, even if you were extremely racist, if you came out against America,
you were done.
Oh my God, you were ostracized.
Yeah.
And you were lucky to not have major damage done to your property.
Or you.
So you didn't want to be deemed anti-American, so you held your tongue. Even if you weren't rooting for him, you never said anything against him. Okay? So when they met and they fought, Joe Louis did win the last fight.
Okay. The one that counted.
Yes. Spoiler alert. Okay, he won. And Max Schmeling went back to Germany defeated and pretty much lost all of everything that he had pre-fight because of how much Hitler had put into this.
Yeah.
So he was so staunchly backed by Hitler. In the book, it talks about how he kind of played both sides, because he didn't fully believe in everything that the Nazis were doing. He didn't believe in racial dominance. Right. He didn't believe in these things, but he also knew that if he, as a sports star, did not say these things,
he wouldn't ever get anywhere.
Not only would he not get anywhere, but he would wind up in a camp. Yeah. Because they would just shut him away so that he couldn't state his views. Mm-hmm. He became a puppet of Hitler because of that. Yeah. After the fight and after the war, you would think that Max would be the one that came out on bottom. Unfortunately, it was Joe. Mm-hmm. So...
And not necessarily for the reasons that we would assume either.
Right. There are lots of different things that happened. So which would you rather hear first? Max Schmeling's story or Joe Louis's?
Well,
Schmeling's was a lot.
That was 5.
That's 5. Yes!
Schmeling was a lot shorter story.
Yeah.
For his after story.
That's because his ended on a high note.
Well, it's
in
also
comparison.
Just a very, very short story of how he wound up there. So do you want to start with that first?
No, I'm going to finish on a good note. So let's do Joe first.
Okay.
Let's get the hard stuff out the way. Bad news first.
Poor Joe Louis. So first off, Joe did have 4 wives.
All white women?
No.
Oh.
Remember, he was sworn away from white women.
I mean, had to ask.
So Joe did wind up with 4 wives over the
Okay.
years. Okay. I believe 2 of them passed away, and only 1 ended in divorce. But I could be wrong on that. But that's not the real controversy and issue. Mm-hmm. Joe Louis fell into the trap that a lot of professional sports people fall into, especially if you come from a very poor background. Yeah. A lot of boxers fell into this all along the way. I mean, just there's one thing you can say, boxing promotion hasn't really changed that much.
Yep, it's all about
Think
exploitation.
Don King, okay? He trusted his manager with all of his life decisions, including his money.
Yeah.
His manager had this fabulous accountant. In 1950, the IRS found that he owed over $500,000 $1950 in back taxes due to the fact that the accountant was not correctly accounting for the purse money won on the fights.
Really?
So he was only reporting the contracted amounts and not the percentage of ticket sales.
Oh, so because the boxers get a portion of that too, right? Interesting. $500,000
in back taxes.
Ooh.
And that's 1950s dollars. So, that's probably close to
I'm looking
$1 million
now.
plus at this point. So he changed managers, changed accountants, came out of retirement with a deal with the IRS that all money from his matches were going to go to the IRS.
So he got nothing.
At that point, he wasn't really able to make a comeback. What is it in today's dollars?
Jesus. It is $6,147,531.12. $6 million. Whew.
So he couldn't really actually form a comeback. He had like 2 major fights, lost both of them, one of them very, very quickly.
Dang. Because he was older at that point, wasn't he?
1950?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was in his 40s.
And I mean, if you think about just professional athletes in general, once you hit 30, you're an old person in sports. So.
And he just didn't have the pickup. He had been retired for a few years. He put on a little bit of weight. He didn't have the muscle mass. And he didn't really want to be fighting. He had to.
Because how else was he going to get any money to be able to pay this debt?
Right. He wound up fighting on the state and county fair circuits. His last wife was actually a lawyer in California. I believe she had made a name for herself as the first black woman, blah, 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 in California.
Right.
I can't remember what all the, but it was something lawyery, judgy, something along those lines. I mean, I could try to find it in the book, but
I trust you.
I'm not going to take the time to find it.
I trust you.
In fact, read the book if you want to know.
Yes, I will post a picture of the book on our social media.
But she did all the work to restructure the payment plans and get him some debt relief and forgiveness from the IRS in the 1970s.
Okay.
So that he wouldn't have to box his entire rest of his life in order to pay off the IRS and not be bringing any money in.
Exactly.
So that's the sadness.
That is. You know what? It always makes you wonder when it comes down to those things. How are the promoters and the accountants held responsible? I mean, I guess the government probably looks at it as, well, you should know what's going on with your finances.
Well, it's kind of like, all the child actors.
I was just thinking it's a very equivalent thing. Like, if you aren't the one actually controlling your money, and especially for Joe, he grew up in a time when education for blacks was just not there. Everybody, especially like you said, in the boxing world, they're always looking to use the boxers just to get over, and they're just disposable. So,
right. So that's Joe's sad story.
Did he die poor?
Not desolate.
Okay.
Because his wife
helped him out.
Had money.
Okay.
But had he not been married to this lawyer, he would have been, he would have been like Vincent van Gogh or Edgar Allan Poe, buried in a pauper's grave.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been very bad, very sad, especially for somebody who was a national hero in the 1940s.
Exactly. It's amazing how you can go from up here at the upper echelon and then fall completely, well, I won't say from grace, but just completely fall to the bottom. Not by any necessarily fault of his own, per se.
Right. On the other hand, Max Schmeling.
Dang it.
He went through a rough period immediately after the fights, like I said, because, he had been Hitler's
go-to guy.
Great White Hope. He was going to improve the Aryan nation.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, he fit into the criteria, but I digress.
He didn't actually live up to that. So he had a rough period where, again, he was basically at the beck and call of whatever the Nazi propaganda machine wanted him to say.
Right.
After the war, he just happened to know a guy who knew a guy. Okay.
Not about what you know, about who you know.
And Coca-Cola was trying to get into the German market in Europe. And they were looking for investors and people who could help them get in there and get, a factory and bottling, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And Max knew people. So he was actually offered shares of Coca-Cola in order to help them get a factory up and running in Germany.
What? That's the most random thing ever. How did that conversation even start? How did Coca-Cola find him? Did somebody just remember his name?
I said, he knew people that knew people. So Coca-Cola was trying to make their way in.
Yeah.
They were talking to people, and they're like, this Max guy, he's in real good with X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so they made deals.
Let me link you guys up.
In order for those things to link up so that they could get the permits and the factory and get everything.
Wow.
Working. He got shares of Coca-Cola as they were entering the European markets.
So, like what they say in the stock market, you want to get in. Wow.
He made millions.
I bet.
Off of that.
To be one of the first ones with your foot in the door for something like that. That's what we all dream of.
So that is his happier story.
Very much so.
Again, all chance. Unfortunately for Joe, fate and chance was not so kind in the fact that he had promoters and accountants that weren't very good.
Yeah.
For Max, he happened to know the right people.
And luckily, despite him having lost that last fight, he didn't get completely alienated from those people that he knew that had those pools of power to be able to.
Right. And Max had a lot of, like I said, he did a lot of straddling.
He didn't go one way or the other
during the war, and there's some proof that he was helping some resistance fronts while at the same time being, this great propaganda machine.
He was a double agent.
So, the people he knew were probably people he had helped.
Yeah.
During the war.
Wow.
And not from the propaganda. So,
his story, in a way, is it the new Rocky movie? The new Creed movies, where they talk about, like, when he fought Draco's son. And, like, they talked about how when Draco's dad lost the fight to Rocky, he completely fell from grace. And then his son was supposed to be like his.
That was the new Creed movie.
That's what I thought. And Draco's son was supposed to be like
up-and-comer.
Restore the Russian name or whatever for boxing.
Which, by the way, think about all the parallels.
That's what made me think of it.
Because the Rocky story for that storyline, U.S. versus Russia.
Yeah.
I don't remember. And I wasn't really like my family. My dad doesn't do a lot of sports, and my family wasn't really big into boxing at this point or anything. But I don't remember any actual real promoted fights, because it would have been a real big promoted fight.
Right.
If that had been a real fight, other than like in the WWE ring, okay?
Right.
If it had been an actual boxing match. So I look at that movie and I think of the Joe Louis story.
Mm-hmm.
And I say all they did was just make both lead characters white.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, again, U.S. versus Russia.
Right.
Versus the country we are fighting in a war.
Mm-hmm.
So, but on that note...
That was a very clear and concise show. I'm so proud of us. I got dinged once. Once. I'm so proud. Pat on the back. We stayed on topic. No weird tangents.
Well, and I feel like I did a lot of the talking, but like I know this story fairly well. Again,
yeah.
I've read books and
I can't wait to read this
documentaries because
didn't Ken Burns do a documentary on this too? Or there is a documentary out here about this?
There probably is.
I wrote it down last time. I think there is.
But it really is one of those things where, like, if you don't know the history, you don't know how it does link into Muhammad Ali.
Mm-hmm.
From these two characters, we got Muhammad Ali. We got George Foreman. We got
Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson.
Sorry, you have to include him in that.
You do. And I mean, the thing is that, like...
Evander Holyfield. Mm.
Right. And again, going back to the way that the fortunes can go off of these people and the fights and what they do with it, there's reasons why George Foreman has to come up with a George Foreman grill and hawk it everywhere.
Right.
I mean, he also has 27 kids named George, but...
That's neither here nor there, really.
Okay, it's not 27. It's only 8 of them, and they're all named George Foreman.
Might be 27.
So, but he then has, but then you have Muhammad Ali, who, was able to keep all that and unfortunately had medical issues.
Right.
But, then his daughter. And then you get to Tyson and all the craziness surrounding him.
Which was spurred on, again, not necessarily by Mike himself, but around the leadership that was around him. The management.
There was some that was just Mike. I mean, honestly, I bet we will find out that Mike suffers from CTE or what used to be known as pugilists and dementia.
Mm-hmm.
But, he hit some rock bottoms. I mean, he had a fabulous mansion just outside of Cleveland for a very long time, and then he hit rock bottom. He was barely making enough to live in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York. And then he somehow got into movies and then reality TV, and now he does marijuana.
Yeah, he owns his own dispensary.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And he does like a podcast and
he's got like a cartoon on Cartoon Network or something like. I mean, he's kind of like entrepreneurial wise. He's like Snoop Dogg. Like he got himself in a little bit of everything. So, or Shaq. That'd be a better equivalent because Shaq's face is on everything. But I digress.
So,
good show.
I hope you all learned something.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, you can trace back from these people all the way to where we are today.
And how boxing hasn't even really changed in a lot of ways. Even to the parties that are involved in the background. Mafia.
So, we want to thank you all for listening. Again, hit us up with any questions that you have.
Fast facts that you learned that you didn't know.
So,
on that note, we want to thank you again on behalf of myself, Amy, and Dr. Robinson. We will see you guys next week. Bye, humans.